Hey everybody, it's Eric Pappenfuss. It's Black Friday, so it must be a buy day. And today, Amanda, we are gonna talk turkey. I'm gonna ask you a question.
Okay.
Which founding father do you think should be credited with being the champion of the American turkey? Do you think it should be Franklin or Thomas Jefferson?
I think I know this one. It's Benjamin Franklin.
Well, you think you know this one because, well, Benjamin Franklin apparently tongue-in-cheek once said the turkey was a much smarter animal than the bald eagle. But really, Amanda, I'm going to argue today that the person who should be credited for championing the American wild turkey is Thomas Jefferson.
Ooh.
And we're going to tell the story about Thomas Jefferson turkeys and the great American moose because we found an amazing book this past week, which is a collection of scientific articles, including one written by Thomas Jefferson himself. Now, Thomas Jefferson, in his lifetime, wrote one book. It was called Notes on the State of Virginia. We've got good used copies in the bookstore. And in this book, he talks about all the bird species in Virginia, including the wild turkey. Just so I can prove it to you, let's go right down here to the wild turkey, or the Galapagos sylvestris. And one of the reasons why Jefferson liked the American wild turkey was because it was a large bird. And Jefferson was obsessed with shapes and sizes and measurements. And do you know why that was? In the late 18th century, there was a dominant theory that was proposed by a great naturalist in France by the name of the Comte de Buffon. And Buffon argued in an encyclopedic work of dozens and dozens of volumes for a theory called the theory of American degeneracy, which basically said that things in America were smaller than they were in Europe. And this was due to the fact that America was a relatively young nation. It had sort of risen up only recently from the swamp. Europe was old and dried out, and so things were stronger. Not based in science. Buffon had never been to America, but nonetheless really questioned whether or not people should even go to America because the climate there, this sort of swampy modern climate, might not be good for you and might not produce as hardy, brilliant people as there are in Europe. Founding fathers wanted nothing of this. This obsessed Jefferson. And so in Notes on the State of Virginia, he started measuring all the animals in Virginia. And guess what? The American otter, bigger than the European otter. The American beaver, bigger than the European beaver. And he proves that, and he writes this in the book. But it's not till Jefferson gets appointed the minister to France in the 1780s. And that's where he is quite famously when back in the U.S. we're debating the American Constitution. He's off in France that he gets to meet the great Comte de Buffon. And he goes to Buffon and he tells Buffon, you're crazy. This theory of American degeneracy is ridiculous. We aren't inferior. Our things are bigger. Buffon just wants to have lunch. He doesn't really want to talk to Jefferson, but he says, look, Jefferson, prove it. Prove it. Okay. So Jefferson gets in his head that he's going to write to America in his friends, and he's going to get them to kill and stuff a giant moose. Because a giant moose, what better symbol for America? He couldn't do a turkey because there weren't turkeys in Europe. But he would prove that the moose in America was 7 feet tall and bigger than anything Buffon had seen. So he actually writes to the governor of New Hampshire, who goes out and sends a party out and kills a giant moose. And they bring it back to camp, and they stuff the moose, and they put it in a crate, and they send it to Jefferson in France. And before the moose arrives, he does get a letter from the governor of New Hampshire saying just a couple minor problems. We had to carry it a long way. We actually knocked the antlers off.
Oh, no.
Don't worry about that. You can find something else that'll work. And it did start to rot and decay, and it's a little bit mangy. It's not a great taxidermy job, let's put it that way. Does this stop Jefferson? No. He gets the moose. He literally hammers onto its head some deer antlers because, Buffon wouldn't know the difference, and he sends it to Buffon. And Buffon gets this mangy, disgusting 7-foot moose, and do you know what happens?
I don't.
We don't really know because we only know from Jefferson's perspective. According to Jefferson, Buffon's convinced. The next volume of his encyclopedia, he's going to repeal his theory of American degeneracy, and he's going to say that Jefferson was right, and that in fact, things are bigger in America, but we will never know because Buffon then dies and is never able to write another volume. And poor Jefferson, who's going through all this trouble to get this moose to France, gets recalled to America, so what's he going to do next? He still has to combat this theory. Everybody still believes in Buffon, even with Buffon dead. So what he does is he decides he's going to write a scientific paper in the major scientific journal of the day in America, which is the Transactions of the American Philosophical Society. And that's the exciting book that we have today, Amanda. Now, Jefferson, he doesn't write about a turkey or a moose this time, but you know what he decides he's going to write about? He's going to write about a big bone, which somebody has given him, which has been discovered in West Virginia. Here is a scientific paper written by Thomas Jefferson, Vice President of the United States, in 1797, talking about the discovery of bones of the clawed kind in the western part of Virginia. And he is going to claim that he has discovered a giant species of lion in America called the megalonyx. And he goes over the bones, and you can see he's still obsessed with measurements, Amanda. He's measuring every detail. And this is going to be proof, he says, that things were great and big in America. Two problems with the theory. By the way, this article is what gives Jefferson the reputation of being the father of American paleontology. But he doesn't believe in fossils because he doesn't really understand fossilization. And he doesn't believe in extinction because he is convinced that the giant lion is still out there. And in fact, most of the article is made up of various stories about people maybe seeing the giant, in Greenbrier, they heard the scream. It's still there. And do you know that one of the reasons that we actually send Lewis and Clark out on the great expedition is to see if they can discover the megalonyx? Yes, it's true. Now, you get to the end of the article, though, and Jefferson is now going to finally lay it down and tell Buffon he's wrong. And this is the great bit. And here we go. He talks about how he delivered to Buffon a skeleton of an elk. There it is, right there. And does this mean then that Buffon is wrong? Well, yes, it does. Some things can be bigger and smaller in different places, but Buffon's theory of degeneracy is wrong. Jefferson has sealed the deal, and this is just one of the fascinating types of stories that you can find in an old transaction like this. There's one more little coda to this, Amanda, which is that it takes a couple years to compile these articles. And while they're compiling the articles for this issue of the Transactions, there's a professor at the University of Pennsylvania who looks at Jefferson's bones, and he actually does some drawings of them. So the megalonyx bones are also reproduced. Oh, wow. This is later. This is a little bit later, right here in the Transactions. So these are the bones that Jefferson believes are of the giant lion. A problem, though, because he is a real scientist and realized that the claws are not retractable like those of the cat. And Wister, in the same transaction, determines it's actually not a giant lion. It's a giant sloth. A little bit different, and the sloth is extinct. Of course. Today, that giant sloth, which is well accepted, is called the Megalonyx jeffersoni. And these fossils are still at the American Philosophical Society, which is pretty neat. But Jefferson makes his argument. He shows it, and he's still arguing about the moose. Do you think he wins the argument, Amanda?
He thinks he wins the argument.
He thinks he does, and he does actually win it, because Buffon's theory is largely discredited as more and more examples of the majesty of America come forward. And by the 1790s, by the time Jefferson becomes president, people don't actually believe that if you're from America, you're going to be weaker or smaller or more infallible.
Right.
And this other book came in, which is just a good one to show. I was really surprised with this. This is published in England. This is a history of famous characters of 1800. And all these folks are Brits. There's some interesting actors and actresses and all sorts of famous people. And all of a sudden, in the middle of the book, there is a biography of Thomas Jefferson. And this is before he's president. This is from 1799. And it basically argues that when we find a man in recess of public duty capable of exploring the wilds of nature, capable of being a scientist, of doing all that, we prove that he's better than the average man. And so it's actually his scientific studies which prove that Jefferson is an example of a great American. And here the British are just arguing that he is in a publication, which is pretty neat. So Jefferson does win the argument. Then he becomes president, and we don't really remember Jefferson as a great scientist today, but maybe we should. Incidentally, back to the trivia question.
Okay.
Ben Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, neither of them wanted the turkey for the national animal or the great seal. They didn't like the eagle. That was associated with the Roman Republic. The Roman Republic failed, so why would you do an eagle? Do you know what they both wanted?
No, I don't.
As the actual animal to symbolize America? Well, it's also in the Transactions of the American Philosophical Society from the same year. It was the American rattlesnake.
That'd be
And
pretty
isn't that a
cool.
beautiful one? They felt that was the true image of America. All right, we're gonna end with a funny book. You'd think I have one about turkey or Thanksgiving. I don't, but I do have one about measuring things.
Oh.
And this is in honor of Thomas Jefferson. It's called Reading Toes. And it is a book which actually argues in a very serious fashion that you can tell people's personality by looking at their toes.
Okay.
And so it's time for one more trivia question, Amanda. I'm going to show you two sets of toes.
All right.
You tell me who is the introvert and who is the extrovert. Ready?
Okay, sure.
Okay. This is Jacqueline. She's 42. Look at her toes. Okay? All right. And then this is Charlotte, who is 7. Just look at her toes. Okay? Now, from the toes, can you tell which is the introvert and which is the extrovert?
I'm gonna guess Charlotte is the introvert.
Charlotte is the extrovert. No, it's because of the crook in the toe. I could explain this to you in great thing, but it has to do with the trust toe hiding under the love toe. But nonetheless, it is, you were incorrect. So
Well.
0 for 2 today. We'll do better after the holidays, Amanda. Hey, thanks for watching. I hope you'll watch next week and every Friday at noon for more adventures in the world of books.